In this edition of the News Review, Syria has slammed the continued U.S. and Turkish presence on the country's soil, saying that Damascus is determined to end the occupation of Syrian territories.
The continued illegitimate presence of American and Turkish forces on Syrian soil meets all the legal conditions of an occupation. The Syrian Arab Republic will spare no effort to end this occupation by all means possible under international law. The actions of these forces, taken directly or through their terrorist agents, secessionist militias, or manufactured and illegitimate entities, are null and void with no legal effect. They are a flagrant violation of Syria's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity.
Walid al-Muallim was addressing the UN General Assembly via pre-recorded video. Muallim slammed the U.S. sanctions on the war-torn country, describing the measures as an inhumane attempt to suffocate the Syrian people. He noted that the real purpose of U.S. sanctions is to put pressure on Syrian people, their livelihoods, and their daily lives. The top diplomat also condemned the Israeli occupation of Syria's Golan Heights, stressing that the area has been a Syrian territory and that Damascus will fight to restore it completely. Joining us on this edition of the News Review, we have Press TV's Muhammad Ali, who's with us from Damascus. Also, we have publisher and editor of Politics First, Marcus Papadopoulos, joining us from the British capital, London. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Muhammad in Damascus. Muhammad, walk us through the recent comments made by Walid al-Muallim.
Yes, Syria's Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim noted to several issues. First, he said, instead of lifting the unilateral sanctions on the Syrian people amid the coronavirus pandemic, sanctions were renewed and even new ones were imposed. For example, he said the so-called Caesar Act, which only aims to put pressure on the Syrian people and their daily lives and is an attempt to suffocate them. Walid al-Muallim also said that there are sides that invest in terrorism and support it to achieve certain goals and agendas, of course, and that the Turkish regime, according to Walid al-Muallim, and I quote, the Turkish regime is one of the main sponsors of terrorism in Syria and in the region. He said that Turkey facilitated the entry during the war, of course, on Syria, facilitated the entry of tens of thousands of terrorists into the country, and also continues to support the al-Nusra Front. Turkey also cut water supplies to over 1 million Syrians in al-Hasakeh and adopted a policy of forced displacement in areas that the Turkish troops control. He also pointed out to several other issues. Al-Muallim said that the Golan was still and will remain a Syrian territory, and Syria will continue to fight for restoring it back fully. And he also pointed out that the continued illegal presence of U.S. and Turkish troops on Syrian territories, on Syrian soil, is an occupation which the Syrian Arab Republic is determined to end in all means recognized by international law.
Marcus Papadopoulos, I'd like to get your thoughts on those comments. Turkey and the United States on one hand, there's the Israeli regime in the Golan Heights. All of these presences are considered illegal. The Golan Heights occupation is also considered illegal by the United Nations. Why are these occupations continuing today?
Because, regrettably, we live in a world where might is right, where international law is utterly discarded by the most powerful countries in the world, where the notion of sovereignty is completely disregarded by the most powerful countries in the world. And yes, ever since 1967, the Golan region, which is a Syrian region, historically, politically, and legally, has been occupied by Israel. And in more recent times, the northeast of Syria, or parts of the northeast of Syria, are controlled by the American military, are occupied by the American military. And in northwest Syria, we see an occupation by a combined Turkish military and al-Qaeda force. And we have to make the point clearly and categorically that Turkey occupies a part of Syria. America occupies a part of Syria. Turkey invaded northwestern Syria. America invaded northeastern Syria. The Turkish presence in Syria, as it currently stands, is no different to the Turkish occupation of the north of Cyprus. And as regards to the American occupation, I believe that the American occupation poses a far greater problem for Damascus and also for Moscow and Tehran than the combined Turkish al-Qaeda occupation of northern Syria, because unless the Kurds and the Americans in northeastern Syria fall out, then the Americans will not relinquish their occupation. They intend to keep a foothold in Syria, and by doing that, that will limit Syria's own influence and power in the region, because Syria will have a foreign military in its country, which is uninvited, and it would also cause problems, limiting problems for Russian and Iranian influence and power in the Middle East. As regards the Turks, well, yes, in northwestern Syria, as I said, there is an infestation there caused by hordes of Turks having invaded. But I do believe that sooner rather than later, that part of Syria, Idlib, will be liberated by the Syrian military backed by the Russians and the Iranians. The problem is going to be the Americans, and I would not be surprised if the Americans effectively turn the parts of northeast Syria, which they occupy, into an American protectorate.
Mohammed, do you agree with what Marcus just said? We're living in an era where nation sovereignties are totally disregarded by major powers.
Yes, I agree, and Syria is an example for that. And I agree also that the Americans in Syria, the illegal presence of U.S. troops, is the main obstacle. The Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim made it clear. He reiterated Syria's stance that Syria will continue to adopt a policy of fighting terrorism in order to liberate every inch of Syrian soil, whether from terrorists or from those occupying Syrian territories, like the United States, Turkey, and Israel. Now, we have to point out that one of the main economic problems in Syria, one of the main factors for the economic suffering in Syria is the occupation of U.S. troops of Syria's natural resources areas like and also the cooperation of the so-called Syria's democratic forces over there. So the Foreign Minister then Muallim made it clear. He condemned actually what he described as the SDF's conspiring over Syria's unity and cooperation. Of course, here we're speaking about their cooperation with the United States. Foreign Minister Muallim condemned the international coalition's actions in Syria, the bombing that has actually killed many of lives in Syria, civilians mostly, and also destroyed the infrastructure. So it is very clear that Syria continues to adopt its policy, which is to fight terrorism and liberate every inch of land, whether from terrorists or from the occupiers.
All right, thanks a lot, gentlemen. Press TV's Mohammed Ali joining us from Damascus. Also, thanks to Marcus Papadopoulos, publisher and editor at Politics First, speaking to us from the British capital, London. With that, it brings us to an end here on this edition of the News Review. But do stay tuned. There's plenty more to come here on Press TV.